Hello, everyone. Sorry for my voice. I lost it a little bit yesterday. I recognize it's the last presentation of the day. It is again about regulation, which is now the most fascinating subject that you can be listening to. We have heard lots of experts talking about different areas in regulation, about the scams, about regulation in the US, about ICOs. I will try to give you an overview of what are the most relevant things that we have to be aware in Europe today on regulation, and what are the current developments that we have to expect to be revealed over the coming months, and that might affect either as an investor or as someone who wants to have a business that is based on crypto. First, myself, so I have a background as a programmer, but I'm an economist actually, and I've been 3 years on Bitcoin. I had some memorable milestones. In 2014, I got my first Bitcoin stolen. You can see there. I just got it out of an ATM, and then I took a picture and I posted it in Facebook. Of course, my private key was visible, and it didn't take more than an hour until someone stole my Bitcoin. So then I was victim of Cryptsy. In 2015, I was victim of the DAO, and I was one of those victims of BTCE still this year. So 3 times victims of exchanges. I've been employed by banks, nevertheless, and my last job, 17 years or almost 17 years working in the banking industry, the 10 last years for HSBC, and the finance department as CEO of the finance department for the private banking. Besides that, I've been doing preaching on Bitcoin on the streets, having a Periscope program where I could tell people what Bitcoin was, and done tutorials on YouTube on my channel so that people could learn how to use Bitcoin. So then why regulation? Because we have heard about regulation today a lot, and the question is, should we really care ourselves about regulation? It's very difficult to say or to try to philosophize why we need regulation, but you just have to see who cares about regulation. So banks care about regulation, the FBI cares about regulation, the European Union cares about regulation, the IRS, the ONU, everybody cares about regulation, justice cares about regulation. So really the question here is that, are you caring about regulation or not, or you want to play differently? There are very few odds that someone who wants to play a different game will be able to succeed, at least in the longer run. I think we have benefited from a kind of a transition in which things were very unclear, and we had opportunities to do some of the things with having a less scrutiny and actually get along with that, at least get some pocket money in the meantime. So the environment in which we are living since 10 years is an environment that moves slowly but safely in a direction that is not going to stop. So regulation is something that might be slow, but it is not something you stop. So it's clear that the transparency in the operations is one of the paradigms today, so the regulator wants to know what is going on, and this is not precisely what happens today on exchanges or with crypto. There is a lot of control about anti-money laundering, so we have heard lots of cases, about that. As well, the taxman, they wants to make sure that they get enough funds to be able to develop the politics. And we have technological progress that is really outpacing much of the rhythm at which regulation moves. And that's a concern by the regulator, because we have now a state of confusion overall, and the regulator doesn't really know what they should do. So in many cases, the wait and see that we have is because they cannot really do anything until they see something like start establishing, or they will find a reason why they need to urgently kick in and start and get going with serious cases. There is a general fight against cash overall in the world. So we have seen in India, there were some of the notes, one of the denominations of the Indian rupee removed of the market from one day to another. That cost was terrific consequences. Overall, we have the anti-money laundering the 4th directive that is going to be reviewed probably. The anti-money laundering directive includes or should include virtual currencies, or is considered now to include virtual currencies, and probably this will be clarified over the next weeks or next month. I'm going to skip this one because if not, I'm not going to be able to complete the whole thing. So the global environment is of confusion, and confusion is never good. It's confusing because it's not at pace in every country. Some countries were able to implement some local regulations, like, for example, you have in France or in Switzerland or even in Singapore, and those might not be aligned with with the directives that we will get from the European Union, for example. At the same way, we have all the tax treatments that are more like bilateral agreements that really and it's difficult really to assess what's the impact on this. We have as well initiatives that are ongoing and not yet very clear. So we have the automatic exchange of information within the European Union, and this is a very serious matter. So every country expects to be able to get information from other countries in the European Union for tax purposes in an automatic manner, so they don't have to request permission for that. We have PSD2, which is implemented now beginning of the year. PSD2, I'm going to talk about it a little bit, so because I think it is worth considering it, and we have as well MiFID coming as well next year, so the new MiFID and new MiFID rules, which as well are going to probably try to address some of the unknowns that we have now, and then the customer protection or investor protection policies that they consider that they have to implement because of the ICOs. So on PSD2, it's something that happens. It's going to happen during 2018. Has been a very long process to implement. Banks were very scared in the beginning. The reason to implementing PSD2, which is the Payment Systems Directive 2, there was a very first one, out of which SEPA came out in Europe. So a way to be able to do fast payments, so one-day payment, one working day payment. Obviously, if it was over a weekend, it was 3 days payment. This was something that was very painful to implement. Some banks just waited till the last moment to make that available to the customers. And then since a few years, European Commission has been working on PSD2 that really promotes a next step on that to make it even more efficient. So PSD2 is aiming to having almost real-time payments within the European Union. It's aiming to have a much more straight processing that doesn't involve so many intermediaries. And they want as well to provide some clarity on the new methods that were named was mobile payments and online payments. Obviously, things like cryptocurrencies were not included in PSD2 because it was a new thing, and they considered that was a complete new animal that they needed to deal with it a bit later. So what has to be clear from this is that the payment service directive that will be implemented next year in all the European Union is going to be followed probably by an amendment that will include virtual currencies, and then we have to see how it is going to play. So overall, imposes big obligations from the payment service providers, so those might be banks or others, and then overall as well creates the figure of the third-party payment service provider. That is that anybody who can actually process payments in the name of the customer. So these people are the new players in the market, of some of the fintech companies, some people that are processing, for example, e-commerce transactions, and they will be able to provide services to merchants to be able to cash directly from the customer bank account without having to go through PayPal or without having to go through credit cards processing. So more or less looks something like this. If I can get the laser here. Where's the laser? This one? No. Okay, sorry. Oh, did something stupid, huh? Okay. Yeah. So this probably is going to affect this is the idea of the regulator. We are going to make this far more efficient than it was in the past. Today we have the merchants on one side. There's a little stop there. We have the banks, and then we have all the credit card and all the payment processors, and then we have the customer. And then with PSD2, they wanted to radically change that and allow the merchant to have access to directly to the customer through a bank or another payment service provider, but getting rid of as many intermediaries as possible. The next step should be really to get rid of that intermediary. If we have virtual means of payment with virtual currencies, there shouldn't be any reason why it is not implemented, and I'm sure that the regulator is very keen to be able to doing this. It is in the interest of the regulator to promote an efficient system for payment. because this is something that it favors and grows the economy. So there shouldn't be any doubt that the regulator is not especially happy with banks in terms of how they've been developing their own or implementing the regulation. They've been lazy and they've been very late in some of the cases. I think that overall just quickly on the currencies and tokens, because we have spoken about it quite a bit today. This is a very, very interesting thing that is going to happen. Nobody really knows what a token is. Okay, in the US, they have already some kind of idea. But there are ongoing discussions, and probably we'll hear something over the next month to try to differentiate what is a cryptocurrency and what is a token. So what it is probably going to be very clear is that it cannot be mixed, and there will be a different regulation for one or for the other. That's something that will somehow affect exchanges, because exchanges will be required to have more capital to be able to operate. That's something that is probably going to happen very soon, and they will act in that regard, because they will start defending the interests of the customers that have been exposed to losses because of exchanges hacks or because ICOs that didn't work well. This will emerge, and this will start happening, and regulator with the excuse to defend the customer, with the reason to defend the customer, they will probably start putting much more tighter controls on exchanges. And that's something that will probably weaken many of those exchanges, and we should see some of the exchanges deciding to go out of business, or maybe start only dealing with a number of cryptocurrencies and start dropping many of those tokens that now they are listing. So the guarantee, or that you will be able to have liquidity for a token that is bought through an ICO, is probably something that is not so clear in the very immediate future. Many exchanges might be forced to drop those other tokens because they will have tighter rules. Those rules on terms of capital requirements will be based in the number of currencies that they deal with, or number of tokens that they deal with, and exchanges will want to drop those that are not the most profitable and just focus on the important ones. So as a conclusion, cryptocurrencies and tokens will probably be separated at some point very soon, so they will have different paths in evolution, in regulation. We will have rulings that probably very soon coming out of the scams that will appear after the ICOs, and those will be probably country by country starting to set up some rules that won't be aligned with the European Union, because it's much easier to put customer protection ruling by country than those aligned in the European Union, and that's probably been going to be give some competitive advantage to some countries or not. We will have much more tighter rules that has been mentioned for online wallets and as well for exchanges, and that will probably mean a consolidation of them or the disappearance of the smaller ones, or maybe as well there will be people will start, or some of those exchanges will start focusing on some of the niches in the market rather than just giving the widest scope of access to all the cryptos. There are very few safe opportunities as of today to implementing a business that depends on crypto, that we can with some certainty expect not to change immediately. Probably that is now Switzerland, even the UK, and probably Singapore. We should expect developments over the coming months in the rest of Europe, and I think it is worth just watching what happens before making any strong investment in anything that has to do with exchanges or anything that has to do with crypto issuance. So what is very sure is that banks are not collaborating, so we are seeing more and more banks refusing transfers coming from exchanges. That's something that is happening more and more every day, and probably you had the case already. This was not bad luck that you had. This is happening to everybody. So, and this is one of the main risks that we have, is that they really, that the banks start building a cartel that will make not possible to continue operating exchanges as they do today. So it's something that the regulators should, in my opinion, try to help consumers, so that those exchanges are not penalized by the arbitrary rules of banks. And it's something that we try to see as well, and to pass the message to the European Commission. I'm part of a policy setting working group that meet to try to come up with a policy or with some kind of advisory policy to the European Union that will treat some of those subjects. So this paper is public, and I guess something that if you're interested, I can distribute to you. And so I just hope that this was not too boring. It's still, some of you are still awake, which is good. And now I think we can just go for the coffee.